Here's the interesting note. The Congressional Budget Office projected what would it cost just to make the child tax credit permanent for the next 10 years. In that case, instead of being $185 billion, it would be $1.59 trillion, or $1.6 trillion. Why the Build Back Better bill may not pass in 2021. Yeah, you can see I'm kind of here on vacation. Been on the road teaching every week for the last several weeks. I think it's important from some of the inquiries I'm getting from you all is what's going on here, what's holding the thing up. And so I want to touch on a couple of reasons and kind of keep it in our terms and not all the media, etc. First thing is that the legislation has passed the House of Representatives. It's now over at the Senate, and because this is a reconciliation bill, when it got to the Senate has to first see how they can vote on it, and they want to keep it to a simple majority. And as a result, this has to go through what we call the Byrd Rule. And that's after Senator Byrd. This happened back in, I believe, 1974. But the important thing is the parliamentarian of the Senate has to go through the bill and make sure that there's no extraneous issues, etc. So if they went to vote today, as I speak, they could not vote on the legislation because that process is not done. Now, they're trying to look at Christmas to get it through. Well, first you have to get it through this process. Once it goes through this process, I want to try to kind of simplify why the tug of war, why they're trying to back and forth. Just without having a educational class in it, but just maybe the concept, the understanding. We've heard this bill, it's a $1.7 trillion bill over the next 10 years. Well, the things I'm going to cite here is from the Congressional Budget Office. It's a bipartisan from Congress. This is not some story I read, some article, but it's the facts of life the congressional budget looked at. For example, the bill as passed. So I'm going to talk about first the bill is passed and how it's funded, and I'm going to talk about what the Congressional Budget Office did and how it's passed, and then the question is, how is it funded? And the big tug of war here is the child tax credit. Real quick, how did we get here? In March of this year, 2021, there was legislation passed for an increase in the child tax credit and also the advanced child tax credit, which went out to approximately 38 million taxpayers. Now, with that, it also went from $2,000 to $3,000 and $3,600 on that credit. In doing that, that was funded for 1 year, 2021. Again, that was funded out of that in March for this year only. So now we're getting toward the end of the year, and in this $1.7 trillion Build Back Better bill, we're now looking at child tax credit again. But in this bill, the funding for it is only for 2022. So two things to think about. Right now, starting in January, there is no legislation, so there is no advanced child tax credit for next year. The funding's not there. So the Congressional Budget Office, what they looked at is the bill as passed. And that is a fact, that cost, the net cost of the child tax credit is about $185 billion for 1 year. This bill only funds and creates child tax credit for 2022. So a year from now, even if this legislation passes, a year from now, we're going to have this same thing again. And so when they talk about 10 years, they're talking about how they fund it and pay for it through taxes, etc. But this now is, we faced it in March under the ARP law. Now we're on Build Back Better, we're doing it, and it's 1 year. Now, which is almost as big as this whole bill. And why that's important is because that's the tug of war. You know, in the Senate, you got the majority of the Senate on one party saying, hey, let's put this through. There is a senator or two who are saying, wait a minute, this may be too large, but the too large is the discussion, are we funding it for 1 year in our $1.7 trillion bill, or do we pull it out separate and let's address the child tax credit issue. It's a social issue, it needs to be addressed. And so that's the debate. Do we put it all in one bill and cover this for 1 year, or do we pull it out and address the issue? We need some kind of permanency. So it does, again, don't shoot the messenger here, but I think it's important to understand what that tug of war, what they're trying to reconcile. They're right now, as passed out of the House, they're reconciling for child tax credit for 1 year. And again, let's just round numbers, that's about $200 billion, that's for 1 year. But if they actually funded it and said this is going to be the law for the next 10 years, they need 1.6 trillion, or 8 times the money. And at that point in time, in order to reconcile, they would have to figure out how to pay for it each year. I don't want to get too far down in the weeds, so to speak. I just wanted to do this while, I'm on, a couple of days vacation, but because of inquiries, I wanted to get this out to say, hey, here's what's really going on. Will this legislation pass? Probably not this year, because again, it's not out of the what we call the BYRD rule. It has to be looked at by the parliamentarian. Once that's done, then they can raise it to whether or not vote on it this year or not. But that's the big tug of war, is the child tax credit, whether it's for 1 year or do we look out over the 10 years. I hope this helps. We'll probably see legislation at sometime in January, February. Please subscribe and see you on the next video.